Hey folks, my name's Ed Trevors. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest serving in the beautiful parish of Christchurch-Shelburne that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm probably going to be talking about this a bit. You're aware that here in Canada, in Kamloops, British Columbia, at the site of a former residential school, a team has discovered and identified a sacred space where the bodies of 215 Indigenous children were buried. This took place over a period of a century. These graves were unmarked, probably undocumented. These deaths were probably undocumented. We don't know much about how they would have been handled. We don't know if the families ever would have received some kind of official notice. We don't know if they would have received a scrawled, handwritten note telling them of the loss of their child. I was listening to CBC this morning, and a member of the Indigenous community, she made a great point. She said, we have short memories. Canadians have short memories. Non-Indigenous Canadians have short memories. She said that this is right now, this is a big deal, that everybody's very upset, and we want to see change, and we want to do great things. Give it a week. Give it a week and this won't be on our radar anymore. Something else will come up. Somebody will do something, something will happen, and that will be the thing that we will focus on. That'll be the shiny object that we give all our attention to. I made mention in other videos that here in Canada, we had something about 5 years ago called the Truth and Reconciliation Report. This was put together by a commission of residential school survivors, partnering with the federal government, I believe, who went out and listened to the stories of people who survived the residential school system, people who made it home, people who made it home and were still alive today. They told their stories about the pain, the struggles they had. They told their stories about what life was like while they're in the school, and what their life has been like since. How the residential school system impacted them, their families, their communities. They told stories about the legacy, the destructive nature of the residential school systems. This report came up with almost 100 tasks, 100 things that we as a nation could do, most of which would require the federal government to do it, but a list of things that we could do to help with the healing process, things that we could tackle to help our Indigenous communities, our Indigenous peoples begin to heal. But we haven't done the stuff on the report. We haven't done it all. We have short memories. It's funny, the Bible is a book that describes how often humans forget. throughout the Torah, we hear the story of how humans forget about God, how humans forget about God has done, how humans forget about what God has asked for. Throughout the histories found in Kings and Chronicles and Samuel, same story. We watch as king after king after king forget about God, move on from God, cry out to God, helped by God, forget about God, move on from God. It's a continuous cycle. This cycle is all through that wonderful book. And it also describes the damage that's done every single time we forget. It describes how we stray, who we hurt, how we lose, how we destroy every time we forget. Describes how we lose our connection to God, to those around us, to our communities. How we lose our ability to love our neighbors every time we forget. We mustn't forget. We mustn't forget. We can't forget this gravesite. We can't forget the dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of residential schools that are still out there with unmarked gravesites. We can't forget that our Indigenous communities are still suffering the ramifications of those schools. They are still suffering the consequences that we heaped upon them as a nation. We can't forget the lives of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, the lives of Indigenous children today are still being adversely impacted by the legacy, by the work of those Indigenous schools. Can't forget. Because if we forget, we'll do it again. If we forget, we won't be the godly people that we could be. If we forget, if we get distracted by that next shiny object, what harm will we do? May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. I pray we won't forget. Amen.